Hello and welcome to our first lesson in the course Educational Psychology. So, why be a teacher? Now, a lot of people will answer this question by saying that they want to witness the diversity of growth in young people and their joy in learning. Other people might say that they want to encourage lifelong learning both for themselves and for other people. Another common answer that people will say when they are asked why they want to teach is that because they want to experience the challenge of devising and doing interesting, exciting activities for the young. Now, there is of course more than this to be said about the value of teaching. Consider, for instance, the young people referred to earlier. In one class, they could be 6 years old. In another, they could be 16 or even older. Now, they could be rich, poor, or somewhere in between. They could come from any ethnic background. Their first language could be Filipino or Tagalog or something else. There are all sorts of possibilities, but whoever the particular students are, they will have potential as human beings. Talents, personal qualities, possibilities not yet realized that can contribute to society, whether as leaders, experts, or as supporters of others. Now, a teacher's job, in fact, a teacher's privilege, that is to help particular young people to realize their potential. As a teacher, you will be able to do this by laying groundwork for lifelong learning. Will not teach any one student forever, of course, but you will often work with them long enough to convey a crucial message that there is much to learn in life. More, in fact, than any one teacher or school can provide in a lifetime. The knowledge may be about science, math, or learning to read. The skills may be sports, music, or art, anything. Whatever you teach, its immensity can be a source of curiosity, wonder, and excitement. It can be a reason to be optimistic about life in general and about your students in particular. Learning, when properly understood, is never ending, even though it often focuses on short-term immediate concerns. As a teacher, you will have an advantage not shared by any member of society, namely the excuse not only to teach valuable knowledge and skills, but to point students beyond what they will be able to learn from you and from other teachers. As an old limerick puts it, consider that this was written before the day of gender balanced language. The world is full of such a plenty of things. I'm sure we should all be as happy as kings. Now, whatever you teach, you will be able to feel the satisfaction of designing and orchestrating complex activities that communicate new ideas and skills effectively. Now, the challenge is attractive to many teachers because that is where they exercise judgment and artistry the most freely and frequently. Your students will depend on your skills at planning and managing, though sometimes without realizing how much they do so. Teachers will need you to know how to explain ideas clearly, to present new materials in a sensible sequence, and at an opportune pace, to point out connections between their new learnings and their prior experiences. Although these skills really take a lifetime to master, they can be practiced successfully even by beginning teachers, and they do improve steadily with continued teaching over time. Right from the start, though, skills at design and communication of curriculum is one of the major perks of our jobs. Now, the very complexity of classroom life virtually guarantees that teaching never needs to get boring. Something new and exciting is bound to happen just when you least expect it. A student shows an insight that you never expected to see, or fails to show one that you were sure he had. An activity goes beyond or better than expected, or worse, or merely different. You understand for the first time why a particular student behaves as she does, and begin thinking of how to respond to the student's behavior more helpfully in the future. After teaching a particular learning objective several times, you realize that you understand it differently than the first time you taught it, and so on. Now, the job never stays the same. It evolves continually. As long as you keep teaching, you will have a job with novelty, and a job that's never going to bore you. So, speaking of change, in the past decade or two, teaching has changed significantly. So much, in fact, that schools may not be what some of us remember from our childhood. Changes have affected both the opportunities and the challenges of teaching, as well as the attitudes, knowledge, and skills needed to prepare for a teaching career. Now, the changes have influenced much of the topics we will talk about in the future. In this video, we will talk about 4 new trends in education and discuss how educational psychology can help you cope with these trends. Starting with the first trend, diversity in students. Students have, of course, always been diverse. Whether in the past or in the present day, students learn at unique paces, show unique personalities, and learn in their own ways. In recent decades, though, the forms and extent of diversity have increased. Now more than ever, teachers are likely to serve students from diverse learning language backgrounds, to serve more individuals with special needs, and to teach students either younger and older than in the past. Now, we are going to look at 3 forms of diversity in today's education. So, take the case of language diversity. There are over 180 languages spoken in the Philippines. Tagalog is the first language for 24 million people, or about 1/4 of the Philippine population as of 2019, while 45 million speaks Tagalog as their second language as of 2013. Now, aside from Tagalog, there are 7 major languages spoken by majority of Filipinos. You have Cebuano, Ilocano, Hiligaynon or Ilonggo. You have Bicolano or Waray, Pampango, and Pangasinense. Now, the educators responsible for the children in these groups need to accommodate instructions to these students somehow. Part of the solution, of course, is to arrange specialized classes such as the use of mother tongue. But adjustment must also happen in regular classrooms of various grade levels and subjects. Classroom teachers must learn to communicate with students whose English or Tagalog background is limited. Teachers must plan lessons and tasks that students actually understand. At the same time, teachers must also keep track of the major learning goals of the curriculum. As you gain experience teaching, you will no doubt find additional strategies and resources for this. Now, the second form of diversity that teachers are increasingly being accustomed to is neurodiversity. Another factor making classroom increasingly diverse has been the inclusion of students with disabilities into classroom with neurotypical peers. In the Philippines, the trend began in the 1990s but accelerated with the passage of the Magna Carta for Disabled Persons in 1992. And again, when it was amended in 2007. The law guarantees free appropriate education for children with disabilities of any kind, whether the impairment is physical, cognitive, emotional, or behavioral. The laws also recognize that such students need special support in order to learn or function effectively in a classroom with non-disabled peers. So they provide for special services, for example, shadow teachers, and procedures for making individualized educational plans for students with disabilities. As a result of these changes, most teachers are likely to have at least a few students with special educational needs, even if they are not trained as special education teachers or have had no prior personal experiences with people with disabilities. Classroom teachers are also likely to work as part of a professional team focused on helping these students to learn as well as possible, and to participate in the life of the school. Now, the trend towards inclusion is definitely new compared to the circumstances just a generation or two ago. It raises new challenges about planning instruction, such as how is a teacher to find time to plan for individuals, and philosophical questions about the very nature of education, such as what in the curriculum is truly important to learn. Now, the third form of diversity that teachers should be preparing to face is lifelong learning. Now, the diversity of modern classroom is not limited to language or disability. Another current change has been the broadening simply of the age range of individuals who counts as students. In many nations of the world, half or most of all 3 and 4-year-old attend some form of educational program, either part-time preschool or full-time daycare. Our current K-12 program now includes kindergarten as a new grade level, preceding grade 1. We also saw extensions in the number of years students spend in basic and secondary education. Now, the obvious difference in maturity between preschoolers and older children lead most teachers of the very young to use flexible, open-ended plans and teaching strategies, and to develop more personal or family-like relationships with their young students than typically with older students. Now, just as important though are the educational and the philosophical issues that early childhood education has brought to public attention. Some educational critics ask whether preschool and daycare program risk becoming inappropriate substitutes for families. Other educators suggest, in contrast, that teachers of older students can learn from the flexibility and open-ended approach common in early childhood education. For teachers of any grade level, though, it is a debate that cannot be avoided completely or permanently. Now, the other end of the age spectrum has also expanded. Many individuals take courses well into adulthood, even if they do not attend formal university or college. Adult education, as it is sometimes called, often take place in the workplace, but it often also happens in public high schools or at local colleges or universities. Some adult students may be completing high school credentials that they missed earlier in their lives. But often, the student have other purposes that are even more focused, such as learning a trade-related skill. So the teacher of adult students have to adjust their instructional strategies and relationship with students so as to challenge and respect their special strengths and constraints as adults. Now, the students' maturity often means that they have life experiences that enhance and motivates their learning. But it may also mean that they have significant personal responsibilities such as parenting or a full-time job, which competes for study time. And that makes them impatient with teaching that is irrelevant to their personal goals or needs. These advantages and constraints also occur to a lesser extent among regular high school students. Even secondary school teachers must ask how they can make sure that instruction does not waste students' time, and how they can make it truly efficient, effective, and valuable. So the second trend is the use of technology to support learning. For most teachers, technology means using computers and the internet as resources for teaching and learning. Especially during the pandemic, these tools have greatly increased the amount and range of information available to students, even if their benefits have sometimes been exaggerated in media report, and even when internet access remains limited to many Filipino students. Now, with the internet, it's now relatively easy to access up-to-date information on practically any subject imaginable, often with pictures, video clips, and even audio to accompany them. Internet is a major tool we are using to continue education even in the midst of a global pandemic. It would seem not only that the internet and its associated technologies have the potential to transform traditional school-based learning, but also that they have in fact begun to do so. For a variety of reasons, however, technology has not always been integrated into teachers' practices very thoroughly as we would have expected. One reason is practical. During pre-pandemic days, in many societies and regions, classroom contains only one or two computers at most, and many schools have at best only limited access to the internet. Waiting for a turn on the computer or arranging to visit a computer lab or school library limits how much students use the internet. No matter how valuable the internet may be in such cases, furthermore, computers tend to function in relatively traditional ways that do not take full advantage of the internet. As a word processor or a fancy typewriter, for example, or as a reference book similar to an encyclopedia. Even so, single computer classrooms create new possibilities and challenges for teachers. Single computer can be used, for example, to present upcoming assignments or supplementary materials to students, either one at a time or in small groups. In functioning in this way, the computer gives students more flexibility about when to finish old tasks or to begin new ones. A single computer can actually enrich the learning of individual students with special interest or motivation. And it can actually provide additional review to students who need extra help. These changes are not dramatical, but they lead to important revisions in teachers' roles. They move teachers away from simply delivering information to students and towards facilitating students' own construction of knowledge. Now, during the pandemic, while technology played an important role in the continuation of education, technological inequality remains a major problem. Many students from remote areas have difficulty accessing online classes. Even for many students in the metropolis, limited resources, sharing of electronic devices, poverty, and poor connectivity persists. Teachers are also facing their own challenges. Many are forced to use their personal devices and to avail of more expensive internet plans just so they can better assist students' learning. Other challenges are less tangible. In using the internet, for example, students need help in sorting out trustworthy information or websites from fluff or fake news websites that are unreliable or even damaging. Providing this help can sometimes be challenging, even for experienced teachers. Some educational activities simply do not lend themselves to computerized learning. You have sports, for example, driver education, or choral practices. As a new teacher, therefore, you will need not only to assess what technologies are possible in your particular classroom, but also what will continually or actually be assisted by new technologies. Then, be prepared for your decisions to affect how you teach, the way you work with students, and many other factors in the student learning process. Now, the third new trend in education is the increase in professionalism of teachers. Whatever your reactions to the first two trends, it is important to realize that they have contributed to a third trend, an increase in professionalism of teachers. By most standards, an occupation like medicine or law, or in this case teaching, is a profession if its members take personal responsibility for the quality of their work, hold each other accountable for its quality, and recognize and require special training in order to practice it. By this definition, teaching has definitely become more professional than in the past. Increased expectations of achievement by students means that teachers have increased responsibility not only for their students' academic success, but also for their own development as teachers. Becoming a new teacher now requires more specialized work than in the past, as reflected in the increased requirement for certification and licensing in many societies and regions. Now, the increased requirements are partly a response to the complexities created by the increasing diversity of students and increasing use of technology in the classroom. Greater professionalism has also been encouraged by initiatives from educators themselves to study and improve their own practice. One way to do so is through action research, sometimes also called teacher research, which is a form of investigation carried out by teachers about their own students or their own teaching. Action research studies lead to concrete decisions that improve teaching and learning in particular educational contexts. Lastly, or the fourth trend that we are facing in education is to navigate through post-pandemic education. There is no going back to before the pandemic, as students and teachers alike look forward to return to the campus hopefully sooner than later. The pandemic has been the largest disruption to education in history, and the enormity of the change was bewildering for many. While the pandemic exposed gaps and weaknesses in our structure system and practices, I believe in framing a narrative for the future. How do we move from survival mode to thriving mode? We do this in part by becoming lifelong learners who can embrace change, learn, and adapt. So, some lessons from the pandemic that we teachers can integrate into future plans include: number one, closing equity and technology gaps. So, the pandemic exposed how much gap there is when it comes to technology and access to educational services. In the years to come and in moving forward, it's important that we have to close these gaps in order to reach students from remote areas and those students who have limited access to technology. The second lesson is that we should put Maslow before Bloom by providing holistic student support before expectations for higher order learning. So it's important to recognize that education does not happen only in schools and does not only concern higher order of learning. It involves the entirety of the student. It involves different contexts, different situations where the students move and resides. So the third is the use of technology for hybrid learning that engages students. Many students during the pandemic express their frustration that they are lacking motivation and are not learning enough. This is in the midst of the use of technology to assist further instruction and learning. In the future, probably in order for us to move forward, we need to design technology for hybrid learning that will effectively integrate technology into our instruction and learning. The fourth is uh, responding to the social or rather to create more um, more personal development for students and for faculty members. Um, the next is to respond to the well-being of students and teachers. One thing that the pandemic highlighted is the importance of well-being, is the importance of taking rest, is the importance of focusing not only on academic achievements, but also on the entirety of the well-being of students and teachers. Moving forward, we need to retain this focus and we need to somehow retool the way we deliver education and the way we expect teachers to provide for their students. Lastly, we need to plan for contingencies. The pandemic caught us off guard, and it's understandable that many of us squabbled that our own educational system was our decision makers were confused on how to continue education. We have seen faulty modules, information in the learning materials that are inappropriate for students, and it's important that we have to recognize that we need to plan ahead, that we need to have a plan B, just in case our plan A's don't work as well as we expect them to. Now, um, while we are still guessing the thought processes of our decision makers, UNESCO actually proposed 9 ideas for concrete actions today that will advance education tomorrow. The first is to commit to strengthen education as a common good. So education is a bulwark against inequalities in education, as in health. We are safe when everybody is safe. We flourish when everybody flourish. So we need to make sure that education is provided for everyone. Number two, expand the definition of the rights to education so that it addresses the importance of connectivity and access to knowledge and information. UNESCO actually calls for a global public discussion that includes, among others, learners of all ages on ways the right to education need to be expanded. The third is to value the teaching profession and teacher collaboration. There has been a remarkable innovation in the responses of educators to the COVID-19 crisis, with those systems most engaged with families and communities showing the most resilience. We must encourage conditions that give frontline educators autonomy and flexibility to act collaboratively. The fourth is to promote students, youth, and children's participation and rights. Um, Intergenerational justice and democratic principles should compel us to prioritize the participation of students and young people broadly in the co-construction of desirable change. Fifth is to protect the social spaces provided by schools as we transform education. The schools as physical spaces is indispensable. Traditional classroom organization must give way to a variety of ways of doing school, but the school as a separate space time of collective living, specific and different from other spaces of learning, must be preserved. Six is to make free and open source technologies available to teaching and students. Open educational resources and open access digital tools must be supported as we have seen during the pandemic, these things play an important role in continuing education. Education cannot thrive with the ready-made content built outside of the pedagogical space and outside of human relationship between teacher and students. Nor can education be dependent on digital platforms controlled by private companies. Seventh is that we need to ensure scientific literacy within the curriculum. This is the right time for deep reflection on the curriculum, particularly as we struggle against a denial of scientific knowledge about vaccines, historical revisionism, and actively fight misinformation. Eight is protect domestic and international financing of public education. The pandemic has the power to undermine several decades of advances. National governments, international organizations, and all educational and development partners must recognize the need to strengthen public health and social services, but simultaneously mobilize around the protection of public education and its financing. Lastly, UNESCO proposed that we advance global solidarity to end current levels of inequality. COVID-19 has shown us the extent to which our societies exploit power imbalances and our global systems exploit inequalities. UNESCO actually calls for a renewed commitment to international cooperation and multilateralism, together with a revitalized global solidarity that has empathy and an appreciation of our common humanity at its core. COVID-19 presents us with real challenges and a real responsibility over our students. Of course, these ideas invite debate, engagement, and action by governments, international organizations, civil society, educational professionals, and as well as learners and stakeholders at all levels. So this list is something that we want to think about when we move forward post-pandemic. So, all things considered, times have changed for teachers, but teaching remains an attractive, satisfying, and worthwhile profession. Now, the recent trends mean simply that you need to prepare for teaching differently than you might have in the past, and perhaps differently than your own school teachers did a generation ago. Fortunately, there are ways to do this. Our university's current program in teacher education provides a balance of experiences in tune with current and emerging needs of teachers. You're offered more time for practice teaching in school, for example, and teacher education instructors often make deliberate efforts to connect the concepts and ideas for education and psychology to current best practices of education. These and other features of contemporary teaching education will make it easier for you to become the kind of teacher that you not only want to be, but also will need to be. Of course, our course dedicated to educational psychology, which is the branch of psychology that studies children in an educational setting and is concerned with teaching and learning methods, cognitive development, and aptitude assessment, and its relation to teaching and learning can be one of your support as you get started. Now, to make it as useful as possible, we will explore concepts in educational psychology while keeping in mind the current state of teaching as well as your needs as unique future teachers. Our lessons in the future will draw heavily on concepts, research, and fundamental theories from educational psychology, but these are selected and framed around the problems, challenges, and satisfactions faced by teachers daily, and especially as faced by teachers new to the professions. So I have selected and emphasized topics on in proportion to two factors: their importance as reported by teachers and other educational experts, and number two, the ability of educational psychology to comment on particular problems, challenges, and satisfaction helpfully. Now, there is a lot to learn about teaching, and much of it comes from educational psychology. As a career, teaching has distinctive features now that it did not have a generation ago. The new features make it more exciting in some ways, as well as more challenging than in the past. The changes require learning teaching skills that were less important in earlier times, but the new skills are quite learnable. Educational psychology will get you started at this task. So, thank you for listening, and my name is Dex Kamitan.